In a global networked economy, is cloud computing a destination or a revolutionary change in the way we use technology?
I guess I'll jump on that. One of the presentations that I often give at conferences is called Cloud Computing Enabling IT's Evolutionary Change. A lot of people think of cloud computing as a destination. You know, once you get to the cloud or once you're cloud enabled, then you're there. Quite frankly, it's just a tool, just like any other tool that we might leverage, whether you're talking about business, IT, personal lives, it's just a tool. It's a different kind of tool though. And that's the piece that I think is a little bit different in that now anyone can leverage services from the cloud. I mean, kind of to the earlier statements that were made around being able to start up an organization and develop an application very quickly. A lot of times it's by leveraging services that are available on the internet that could be considered cloud-based services. So that it does play a pretty significant role, but I'd never look at it as a destination. I'd always look at it as one tool, and it's not a tool that fits every screw either. So that's something else just to keep in mind.
I have a slightly different perspective, but I do think if you look at this 5 years from now, it's just going to be, the computing model is just going to be very, very different, right? I mean, if you think about, if you go to an airport, and I travel a lot, you go to an airport and you watch anybody who's 15 years to maybe 22, 23 years old, they either have a Mac or they have a netbook. They don't have what we have, which is a laptop. But they just don't. And so they don't compute on a netbook, on a laptop anymore. So they're not going to be used to having software on their computer. They're going to do everything in the cloud. It's kind of like Wi-Fi. You know, nobody thought you could sit here without a cable attached to your laptop. And, 6, 7 years later, nobody has a cable attached to their laptop, right? So I think that's what the cloud's going to do. I think, things like Google Apps, it's really going to change the way things are done. And even if you talk to Microsoft, they will tell you that everything's got, even SharePoint and Exchange and everything is going to be online. And there's going to be very little software. And yeah, you're right, there will be some compute that needs to be done on-premise and everything else, but I think the model's changed. And I think it's going to be way different in terms of how it's consumed, right? And it's a tool from the perspective it's transparent, but the reality is what you do as an end user or an enterprise or a company, it's going to be very, very, very different. Even 10 years ago, I just think the models, the form of it has changed. And it's, you still have to solve a pain point. If you think about something like CRM, and you think about the multiple, it's the gift that keeps giving. I mean, there are companies that have been created, whether it was Vantiv and Scopus and Clarify and 3 or 4 guys back in the 90s to Salesforce.com now. You think about all these guys, they've basically done the same thing. They've just adopted whatever the current model of consumption is. So I think the pain point is what you need to address and focus on, whether it's in consumer or in enterprises. Whether it's cloud computing today or some other form tomorrow, and it has to be all over mobile phones or smartphones, 5 years from now, it doesn't matter. You still address the same pain point. And for everybody who's starting a company or focused on, a new venture, I think that's what you got to focus on, is what is the pain point that you guys are addressing.
Anyone else have any? No? So we just have a few more questions here from my side, and then I'm going to open this up to all of you to ask questions. There'll be a mic passed around. But this is sort of an interesting subject for me, is because I deal with and have dealt with ever since my IBM days the idea, the traditional license-based software model. And the idea here is the traditional license-based software model dead, or does digital rights management have a role to play in some sense? That'd be a good one for you, David.
So we get to see. I had lunch today with a client of ours that they say they're in the startup, restart business. Call it now. And so basically, these guys are buying failed startups with hot technologies and restarting them in a different way. So there's an example. They've just taken this technology. This company developed this silicon chip technologies. The VC spent $50 million. I hope it wasn't you guys. I don't think it was. And these guys ended up buying it for probably 99% discount on the dollar, and all the technology. And they're going out and they're having a different license model. Instead of building products, they're going to license the IP to other chip makers. And they're getting some traction, and they might actually build something valuable out of this. So we get to see a lot of those types of situations. We get to see a lot of companies. We go into companies that are, they're raising their D round of funding. They've run out of finance, and but they've got a portfolio of patents. And then they realize, wow, this is valuable, and actually it's valuable to license those patents out. Maybe an alternative model. And there are many companies that we see in the patent business that have gone purely on this IP licensing model, and instead of building products. So there are different models out there. Software licensing, it's always been a situation where you've got to be a big, strong company to get the credibility for someone to license your software. And getting there is very, very hard to do. You need to spend a lot of money, establish a lot of credibility before someone's going to buy your software, typically. And so it's a difficult licensing business to get into. I think it's been interesting to see what Apple's doing in the business. When I was at Apple, we had this spreadsheet, this kind of business plan that what if Apple could take a slice of all the software that was sold on the Apple Mac. This was about 20 years ago. And look what they've done. I mean, they've done it now, and this App Store is just phenomenal. So those guys make a lot of money on the software. I think Microsoft's doing similar things with the Xbox. So those types of models, distribution models, are very interesting. And it's a real changing environment where there are a lot of opportunities to do new things, like Apple has done in software licensing, distribution.
So here, go ahead.
So I guess, just to understand the question is license-based software. I mean, the way I think about it is it's two axes that you got to think about. And I went through the list of companies that are here from TechBA. I guess, there's on-premise and there's hosted software, and that's one axis. And then the other piece of it is perpetual license versus subscription models. And I think, if you think about it that way, there is going to be a need for on-premise. There's always going to be a need for software in the cloud. And I think the model is switching more towards, cloud computing or cloud-based software. But I think from a consumption model perspective, perpetual versus a subscription, there is a CapEx versus OpEx argument to be made there. And I think what we're finding is a lot, even in 5 years, the model towards, even the channel thinking about monthly subscriptions and paying as you go, and that model's really changed. I think those are the two dimensions along which I would think about it is, hosted versus on-premise and subscription versus perpetual. I think the traditional Oracle, SAP, perpetual license model, that's not going to survive for that long.